Countering Nuclear Proliferation, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Robert Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. While the end of the Cold War eliminated the imminent threat of a full-scale nuclear exchange, the specter of a nuclear crisis continues to haunt humanity. With 26,000 nuclear weapons still in existence worldwide, and several states pursuing the ability to produce more, it remains an issue of paramount importance. To help us explore the critical nuclear policy decisions facing the next American president, we're very pleased to be joined by one of the nation's foremost authorities on the nuclear proliferation and disarmament. Joseph Cirincione is president of the Ploughshares Fund, a global security foundation. He's also author of numerous articles and books on nuclear weapons, including his latest, Bomb Scare: The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons. He previously held senior positions with the Center for American Progress and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The World Affairs Councils of America have named him one of their Foreign Policy 500, a select group of individuals with the greatest influence on shaping U.S. foreign policy. Joseph, thank you for being here in Milwaukee and here with us on International Focus.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Joseph, as those of us who may be old enough to remember the nuclear debates of the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, there have been lots of these moments where people would say, now is the moment. Things are bad. We've got a bipartisan consensus. We want to push for the elimination of nuclear weapons. And we've seen that moment kind of come and go.
Yes.
Why is that moment here again? Why do you think this is another one of those moments?
Well, you're exactly right. We in the history of these debates, there have been these turning points where it could have turned over. Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev in 1986 in Reykjavik, almost made a move towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. The end of the Cold War in 1991, George H.W. Bush and then Bill Clinton almost did it, but missed the moment. We think that there's a moment like that coming now. The window of opportunity is opening now for several reasons. First of all, there's the threat. There's wide expert agreement that nuclear terrorism, an al-Qaeda attack with a nuclear weapon on the United States, is the #1 threat to the national security of the United States. That is something we have to stop. Number two, the existing policies that have tried to prevent such a threat have not worked, have failed. In this administration, it was identified not as al-Qaeda with nuclear weapons, but rogue states with nuclear weapons. So the invasion of Iraq was supposed to prevent Saddam from getting weapons. It's backfired. We invaded the one country that didn't have them, and Iran and North Korea, that did have nuclear programs, accelerated their efforts. Terrorism has gotten worse, and we're no closer to solving that problem. So that policy fails, opens up some policy space for new ideas. The third factor is that we're starting to get some of these new ideas. We're seeing a host of non-government organizations come forth with proposals, reports, agenda for how to solve this problem once and for all. Most importantly, an effort that's being led by 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, former Secretaries of State George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, the Republicans, and former Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee Sam Nunn, and former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry. These 4 have joined together for what they say is a campaign for a nuclear weapons-free world. So for the first time since the Kennedy administration, you'd have to say, we have a call for the elimination of nuclear weapons coming not from the left, but from the moderate middle, from the security elite, and they're being joined by many other former officials. And finally, and this is the sort of the magic moment, we're seeing a turnover of leadership, not just in the United States, which is the key country in the world, but in major countries around the world, new leaders are coming to the fore. United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Russia, by next year maybe Iran and Israel, many other countries, on almost an unprecedented simultaneous turnover of executive leadership that gives you the possibility of new leaders, less wed to the policies of the past, being willing to take these new ideas to finally resolve the nuclear dangers that have perplexed us for generations.
I want to talk about maybe what are some of the roadblocks that those past initiatives have hit, where people would say, well, it's all well and good to get rid of nuclear weapons, but unless you've got something to replace it, we can't get rid of the policy. Or you have states who are maybe new nuclear powers like India and Pakistan saying, well, if you can have 26,000 nuclear weapons,
right,
we can have a dozen. And we won't sign anything that makes us get rid of those. So what are some of the roadblocks in the past, and how might we be able to get by them this time?
The key, I think, is to see all these issues as related. We can't go around playing nuclear whack-a-mole, saying, oh, here's a threat, we're going to hammer that one down, and then it pops up someplace else. We invade Iraq so that we won't have mushroom clouds. It turns out Iran's program accelerates. North Korea sets off a nuclear weapon. We try to sanction them and squeeze them. India's developing nuclear weapons. It has to be a comprehensive approach that sees that this is all related. It's like you can't tell your kids to not smoke if you got a 2-pack-a-day habit. Our nuclear weapons influence other people's decisions. And that's what you're seeing now in the policy world, the interconnectedness of this. So we have to get serious about the elimination of nuclear weapons. Most of the weapons in the world are held by the United States and Russia. We have about 10,000. Russia has about 15,000. There's a broad consensus that we can take dramatic action to reduce those stockpiles. Not necessarily eliminate them, but be on the road to elimination. This enables us to get international support for tough new conditions that make it much more difficult for any other state to acquire them. And we have to stop playing favorites. You can't have good proliferators and bad proliferators. It's okay for India to have nuclear weapons. It's not okay for Iran. That double standard won't work. And that's the kind of analysis you're seeing now. And finally, you have to stop making it a partisan issue. And that's the significance of the Shultz, Kissinger, Perry, Nunn movement. You're seeing lots of former secretaries of state and secretaries of defense join in on this. It's recently been endorsed by Jim Baker, Colin Powell, Frank Carlucci, Melvin Laird, all Republicans. When you see that kind of movement coming up, it becomes safe for Democrats to embrace it.
Well, that's just it. I think it's always been difficult for anybody to say we should give up most of our nuclear arsenal when they're always vulnerable to the attack of, well, you're just soft on defense.
Right. As long as this issue is used as a spear point to attack the Democrats as being weak on defense, you're not going to get the policy movement. So it's got to be bipartisan from the get-go.
So are we at that point where perhaps there are those, as you mentioned, several people who would be seen as serious hawks, saying that strategically it's in our interest to get rid of the large stockpile of nuclear weapons from a security standpoint? So are people really willing to go to bat for that position?
Yes, but in different variations. And when you have a broad coalition like this, people have slightly different approaches. So you have a guy like Henry Kissinger, the ultimate realist. He's now embracing the idea of eliminating nuclear weapons from a realist perspective. He understands that those are the only weapons that can really do serious harm to the United States, and that we're at a military advantage in the world with our conventional military power, so we want to prevent other people from countering us with that equalizer of nuclear weapons. So it's a realist perspective on this, and it dovetails with others who are more idealist in their approach, that's saying these are horrible weapons that shouldn't be used basically on moral grounds. You're seeing the unity of that approach right now. And here's the beauty of what's going on right now is you don't have to agree on why you want to get rid of those nuclear weapons or exactly what the time frame is, or even if you really can do it. You know, there's a serious question of can you actually eliminate that last nuclear weapon? What if somebody's got a bomb in the basement? But that's married up, as long as you're on that road, that vision of moving towards elimination, you can marry it up with practical steps that improve our security right now, like securing all the loose nuclear materials in the world so Al-Qaeda can't get the material or the weapon that they would need for a nuclear weapon, like taking all our weapons off of hair trigger alert. Right now, about 2,000 of our warheads are ready to fire in 15 minutes notice. The bad news is that so are 2,000 of Russia's warheads ready to fire in 15 minutes notice. A mistake, a miscalculation can lead to a nuclear catastrophe. It's unacceptable that a Russian president would have only 5 minutes to decide whether to launch an attack on the United States. We can do something about that now, and in so doing, it moves us further towards that goal of eliminating all the weapons.
Well, you mentioned Russia obviously has a very key role in this, and the last couple of years have not seen a step forward in U.S.-Russian relations. So how is, we've got several minutes before our break, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of how Russia factors into this equation.
Well, they have 16,000 nuclear weapons, the biggest stockpile in the world, and they're a warehouse of nuclear materials. So if you're Al-Qaeda and you want to get a nuclear weapon to attack the United States or any country, where are you going to go? You're not going to go to Iraq. They don't have the material. You're not going to go to Iran. They don't have the material. You go to where the material is. That's Russia or Pakistan or any of the 40 countries that have highly enriched material that could be used for bombs, but they're using it for civilian purposes. So that's why you've got to have the involvement of all these countries in securing their nuclear materials. Russia is the key nation to be negotiating with at this point, to be cooperating with. And at this point, I say U.S.-Russia relations are at their worst point in decades. We had better relations during the Cold War than we have right now. That's got to be at the top of the next president's agenda.
And a big factor in that is in recent days, the U.S. and Poland have reached some tentative agreement on an outline of a missile defense base in Poland, which has angered the Russians to no degree, and though pleased perhaps some proponents of missile defense here in the States. How does that issue play into this?
I actually don't think we're ever going to see those bases built. President Bush is rushing to deploy a technology that doesn't work against a threat, an Iranian long-range missile that doesn't exist. I think he's doing it for institutional purposes, trying to lock this program in place so his predecessor will have more difficulty dismantling it. It has really riled the Russians. I was just in Moscow a few months ago, and they see all this as aimed at them. They see the U.S. putting new military bases on their border with advanced weapons, and they have to assume that they will work. Well, I may have my doubts, but any military planner has to assume they will work, and they will have a capability against Russian missiles. So they are going to have to take countermeasures, as any military planner would. It's really, really disturbed U.S.-Russian relations. It doesn't have to be this way. There are ways to go about this cooperatively with Russia that wouldn't cause this kind of antagonism.
Well, we've just about a minute or so before the break, and I'm wondering if I could press you a little bit on what's the quid pro quo for Russia if in fact they do reduce the arsenal and we reduce ours. I think they still may want to have a question about what else is in it for them.
Well, one thing that's in it for them is good relations with the United States and being recognized as an equal for the United States. There's always a lot of pride in these kinds of negotiations, and this is the one issue where they're the equal of the United States. So there's actually a willingness on Russia's part to negotiate this. Two, it saves them money. They've got a deteriorating, declining nuclear arsenal. They would like to reduce it anyway. It'd be good to be able to get some agreement that the U.S. is going to be reducing while they reduce. I think you could go down to about 1,000 nuclear warheads each, which is a fraction of what we now have, quite easily. And I would say, finally, for them, they don't have any real interest in being antagonistic with the United States. They want to have good relations with the United States. They basically want to be doing business with Western Europe, not in an antagonistic relations with Europe. That would help. It would be good for business to be making these kinds of strategic deals.
Great. We're talking with Joseph Cirincione of the Ploughshares Fund about nuclear proliferation and disarmament. We'll be back in just a moment on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking about countering the threat of nuclear proliferation with Joseph Cirincione of the Ploughshares Fund. And Joseph, I'm wondering if we've been talking about Russia, and one of the other traditional counter arguments against having fast reductions in the U.S. nuclear arsenal is that we always need something to counter other proliferators, and then you have countries like India and others for whom the bomb, being part of the Club of 9 of nuclear power states, is a tremendous status symbol, and that alone sometimes will lead them to say, well, no, we don't want to sign on to any zero nukes regime. How do we deal with those states at that tier? Once we get past Russia, how do we deal with the other states for whom this is a major status symbol?
That's exactly right. You've got to do this in stages. So let's deal with the large arsenals first, but as you start reducing them and making progress, you have to quickly pivot over to those countries like China, the United Kingdom, France, who have hundreds of weapons, and then Pakistan, Israel, and India that have tens of weapons. We estimate they each have about 100, maybe 150 each. And for these, well, for most countries, they acquire nuclear weapons in the first place for security reasons, for prestige reasons, or for domestic politics. It's to a ruling party's advantage to have this issue. It benefits them domestically. You have to understand those reasons and help countries realize that they can satisfy their security, prestige, and domestic agendas better in a world where there are no nuclear weapons, where they're participating, like most countries in the world, in a regime that says that these are horrible weapons that no civilized nation should have. And part of that is making sure that you're working hard to resolve the conflicts that give rise to the proliferation imperative in the first place. So you're never going to convince Pakistan and India to give up those weapons unless you resolve the Kashmir issue. You're never going to convince India to do it unless unless India sees improved relations with China, for example. And you're never going to convince Pakistan to give up those weapons unless there's a reduction in anti-U.S. Muslim anger. So you have to work all those issues at the same time. This kind of stuff is tough, but we've done it before. We know how to do this. It's called diplomacy, and it's called consistency. And you do it with Europe, you do it with Southeast Asia, you do it in Latin America. It's time to be applying it to the number one threat we face today, nuclear proliferation.
Well, this may be an issue that would be subtle for most casual viewers of the nuclear issue and these other events around the world, but that traditionally those that dealt with nuclear proliferation and security issues almost had a different status in terms of U.S. diplomacy than your average State Department person who might be working on the Kashmir issue or on Israel-Palestine or something. What you're talking about, if I understand it, is basically folding the nuclear issue into that basket of general diplomatic issues and treating it in a comprehensive way. I mean, is that the strategy?
Yes, and it's recognizing that this is our number one threat and takes precedence over other issues. So, for example, why does Pakistan have nuclear weapons? We have known Pakistan has been going for nuclear weapons for decades. We looked the other way, both Democrats and Republicans, because we had other geostrategic interests. We needed Pakistan to help us throw the Soviets out of Afghanistan. Oh, we needed Pakistan to help us throw the people who threw the Soviets out of Afghanistan. We had other interests, or we wanted to sell F-16s to them, or no, we didn't want to sell F-16s to them. And the nuclear program took, we looked the other way. As a result, we now have a Pakistan that I think is the most dangerous country on earth. It has enough material for between 50 and 100 nuclear weapons, an unstable government, strong Islamic fundamentalist interests in their government, and by the way, Osama bin Laden, who's established training camps in Pakistan. Pakistan could go from a major non-NATO ally to our worst nuclear nightmare overnight. And once you start to recognize that, you realize this is how you have to approach it, not tagging countries good and bad based on their alliance structure, but realizing you have to eliminate these nuclear weapons wherever they are, or else we're going to pay. Sooner or later, a terrorist group is going to get that weapon and bring it to Milwaukee, bring it to New York, bring it to Seattle, and use it.
Well, that's perhaps the big sort of elephant in the room here is the terrorist threat, and that that things have changed since the Cold War time, where we do have to worry about states, but we don't have to worry about them in the same way that we have to worry about non-state actors like Al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups. Is it a fundamentally different strategy for dealing with those groups than dealing with on the state-to-state level?
Yes, you cannot deter a terrorist group. So if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, for example, that's a terrible thing. We don't want that to happen. But they wouldn't attack us with it. Deterrence is alive and well. It's not a policy. It's a condition of international life. They know it would be a suicidal gesture. They would be met with swift and certain and overwhelming retaliation for doing that. However, a terrorist group You can't deter a group that has no territory, that has no national future, that you can't pinpoint where you're going to strike, who you're going to retaliate against. That's why the solution to nuclear terrorism is to separate the terrorist from the material, to go after the material, the source of the problem, reduce and eliminate all the nuclear material in the world so they can't get it in the first place. We actually have government programs that are designed to do this, bipartisan support for this. We've secured half the nuclear material in the states of the former Soviet Union over the last 15 years. That's the good news. The bad news is we haven't secured the other half. Why? Because these programs are creeping along at a petty pace. We devote about $1 billion a year to this. We spend that amount of money every 2.5 days in Iraq. Where are our priorities? That's why I'm encouraged when I see Senator Obama, Senator Clinton, Governor Romney, when he was in the campaign, pledge that as president, they would secure and eliminate these nuclear materials over the next 4 years. They would make it a priority. They would make it practically impossible for terrorists to get that material virtually. That's why people like Graham Allison up at Harvard call nuclear terrorism the ultimate preventable catastrophe. We know what to do, we just need presidential leadership to get it done.
And aside from controlling or access to nuclear materials, what is the threat currently? I mean, how well can we estimate, with any reliability, what the threat of a group like Al Qaeda acquiring the materials and being able to, put them in a form that could be used in an attack?
Right. The good news is that a terrorist group can't make it from scratch. That requires a factory, an industrial capability, billions of dollars. It requires a state. So the terrorists can't do that. But if they can get the material and expertise, former Soviet scientists, former Pakistani scientists, it's well known that a terrorist group could construct a crude nuclear device, a Hiroshima-type bomb, that would fit in the back trunk of a car and could be smuggled into the United States fairly easily. So, but saying all that, it's still difficult to do that, to get the material, to get the expertise, to build the thing. So the risk is actually low. It's only the fact that the consequences are so high that when you do the normal threat assessment, risk times consequences, that you realize that is our #1 threat. The consequence of a nuclear attack on a city that would kill hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, destroy a major economic or political center of the country, change the politics of the country perhaps forever, as a panicked population would insist on tough new security measures to make sure it never happened again. Those kinds of consequences really drive any serious policymaker to say that this is our #1 threat. This is where we should be focusing our resources, not spending, for example, $12 billion a year on a missile defense system against one of the least likely threats.
I want to turn us more toward the current election now and the campaigns that are happening. I won't ask you for an official endorsement of anybody, but we don't hear a lot. We hear a lot of talk of national security. How do you answer the 3 a.m. phone call?
Yeah.
But we don't hear a lot of explicit talk about countering the nuclear threat or the threat of nuclear proliferation. How are the candidates incorporating this into their policies, positions, if at all?
Well, let me speak candidly about this. The range goes from Senator McCain, who doesn't talk much about this at all, and when he does, leaves open the possibility of using nuclear weapons on Iran, to Senator Clinton, who has introduced legislation in the Senate to secure loose nuclear materials and appoint a Democratic an assistant Deputy National Security Advisor to be in charge of it, and has a fairly consistent plan for how to deal with this. And Senator Obama, who does all that, but has introduced legislation in the Senate with Chuck Hagel, a leading Republican senator, and has established a bipartisan basis for a series of measures to reduce the threat, and has embraced the goal of eliminating nuclear weapons. That's the spectrum of opinion. So from my point of view, my agenda is, I see that there's certain candidates would be better at accomplishing my agenda than others. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. But in addition to the specific dealing with nuclear proliferation as an issue.
And why? How does it go in the campaign?
Yeah.
Well, again, this is just purely selfish. It's not clear that that it's good for the cause to have this be raised in a campaign, because traditionally in campaigns, the conservatives attack the liberals for being weak on defense. So any national security issue that's raised during a campaign, it tends to get pushed to the right, just as the liberals attack the conservatives for being gutting Social Security. So it's not clear that you want this to be raised in a campaign, that this is where you're going to get serious discussion about this, or that it's going to somehow elevate the issue and give the president a mandate. I would just as soon be working with the people that I think are likely to move in to the next administration, working with them behind the scenes to see if we can get a consensus on the
we have just
next plan.
Half a minute left. I'm wondering if you've got a good suggestion for people who want to educate themselves more about this issue. Website, Ploughshares Fund, where can they go?
It's, well, at ploughshares.org, we have a comprehensive sort of non-proliferation portal. You can go and see what real people are doing, who are the best people with the best ideas, what's going on in the field, and it leads you to lots of other places to take a look at this. You can also Google Cirincione and take a look at everything I've written in the last 15 years.
Well, Joseph Cirincione, Ploughshares Fund, thank you very much for talking to us about countering the threat of nuclear proliferation to our viewers. We'll see you next week on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,